Hey, welcome back. So far we've seen how event listeners work, but we can also combine those to see what we can do with class lists. So let's deal with class list here and see what that is all about. So let's come to our file here, and what I will do is remove all this to avoid confusion. However, I'll leave my button here. Let me remove the value for the text here. So I just have an input here and I have a button there. Okay. So I'm going to refresh and there we are. Okay, now what I want is to manipulate something else down here using class list. Okay. So what do I put down here? Let me put a div for simplicity. Now what I want to do here is put a class name for this div. So the first class name is going to be, I'll put several. So let me say a class name of green, like so. Okay. So of course, if I refresh, I won't see that thing until I create the class itself. And let's do this. Let me create styles here. Okay. So as you probably have guessed here, class list is for manipulating CSS classes on objects. So since I've created a green class here, I'm going to say .green so I can create that class. Sorry there for a second, .green. So any styles I put here are for that same class. So for example, I can say something like background color green, of course, height 200 pixels, width 200 pixels, just so we can clearly see this thing here. So let me refresh and there we go. Now what I want is to create a second class here. So instead of green, I'm going to create one called blue. So I'm going to copy everything that is in here and then put it here. The only thing I'll change is the color to blue. So what I want is to be able to toggle between green and blue for this item. So I want, when I click here, this changes to blue, and then I click again, it changes to green. Now it's a very simple thing to do because of class lists. I can simply toggle between green and blue class, just replace it here. So how do I do that? So the first thing I will do is here, I'll put an on-click listener, of course, so that it can listen for that click. So I can put the listener from here, or I can add it from the from down here. It doesn't really matter. I'll do it from here for now, simply because this is easier. And then I'll tell it what function to run, which is change underscore color. That's the function to run. Oh, I don't need the semicolon there. Now, there are some times you're going to need to use some variables that come from here, and we're going to talk about that in depth later on. But it's a good practice to put event in there like this, because you will use that event once in a while. Now, event is a variable created by JavaScript that represents the event that has happened here, which is the click event. So it's like carrying the click event into the function that you're going to be using here. So eventually I'll explain how this is very useful and how you can add other things instead of just event in this section. So let's recreate the function down here first. Say function. What has happened here? Change color. Now, because I've added event there, I can put E there to represent the same event. Now, the reason I'm putting E instead of event, just like here, is because E is easier to type. That's it. But here I must write it as event because if I just say E like this, JavaScript will not know what this E means, because now it's like a variable that's undefined. So that will be a problem. So if I write event, it knows exactly what I'm talking about, which is an event. So if you don't want to put the event, you can simply leave it empty. It will still work, but just don't put any random thing there because it will be undefined. But here E represents that event. So what do we do now? Excuse me. So now once I click this function will run. So I want this function to replace the class name of this div. So in order for us to be able to capture this div or get hold of it, we need to give it an ID. So you can either give it an ID or another class name that is used to identify it. So since I can put many class names here, I can do that by saying JS my div, something like this, and leave a space. So make sure you leave a space. So this is one class and this is another. So it doesn't matter how many of these you add in here, how many classes you add, it's still going to work the same. So we'll use this one to identify the div, we'll use this one for the styles. And that's why we add JS at the beginning, just so to remind us the next time we come to the code to say, okay, we are using this to identify the div. That's why it has a JS at the beginning for JavaScript. But you don't have to put this though. It's not necessary. It's just a way to remind us that this is not part of the styling. So what I want now is to say var my div, to capture that div, is equal to document dot query selector, my favorite selector method. And then what are we getting? We're getting JS my div. But always remember, because we are getting it as a class name, we should put a dot. If it was an ID, we would put the hash symbol. So there we go. Now my div is equal to that div over there. Now what we want to do is to change the class name. So what I will say to it is I will say my div dot class list dot add. Okay, now there are two things here you have to keep in mind. So class list represents the classes that are inside here. So there are two of them. So class list will contain two of these. Now after this, there's two things you have to be aware, two words here. There's add and there's remove. So of course remove will remove the green and add will add something. So let's try by saying dot remove, and then what class name are we removing? That's green. It's that simple. So there's green there and I want to remove it when I click the button. So let's see what happens when I do that. So I'm going to click here, and as you can see, the class is gone. That's why we can't see this anymore. It's not styled at that point. But if I refresh the page, we'll see it again. But this is not really what I want. What I want is to replace it with blue. So all I can do is now say add, after removing that one, add the blue. Like so. Refresh and click. So now as you can see, I've added a blue class to the div. You see how easy this whole process is. But the thing is, if I keep clicking, because I keep adding blue there and removing green, note that if I go to the inspector here, I will not see an error here where it's removing green, because here green does not exist anymore. There's no more a green class there once we click that button. But every time we click it, we are removing green, which does not exist, but it doesn't show us an error. If I right click here and say inspect element, you'll see that the div here contains blue but not green, and yet when we try to remove green, we don't get an error. So just keep that in mind, that you can remove even though it doesn't exist and you won't get an error. Now I don't want this, I want it to toggle back and forth. So what do I do? Well, I can check if it contains green or it contains blue, then I add one of the other. So to do that is very simple. We just run an if statement and say if my div dot class list, so another word that is important here, dot includes wait. Sorry, I get confused here most of the time. So either it's include or contains. I think it's contains. Yeah, I think includes is for strings. So anyway, if you get confused, just try either. So we're going to try contains. So we want to see if it contains green. Yeah. So if green exists in here, excuse me, I have a terrible flu. Hopefully it's not COVID-19. I hope. Okay, so there we go. So green, we should have moved this one here and the green one down here. So I'm going to say else and do that. Okay, so if the class list contains green, then add blue. But before we add blue, let's remove the green, shall we? So if it contains green, remove green, add blue. If it doesn't, then what we will do is remove one and add the other. So let's just change what we are adding. If it doesn't contain, here we want to add green and remove blue. Okay, I think that does it. So let's give it a spin, shall we? So let me click now. Bam, bam. So as you can see now, I'm toggling through the two. So what I want you to take away from this is that you can use classlist.contains. You can also use classlist.remove and classlist.add. This is all you need to do a lot of things. So for example, you can, instead of having changing colors, you can add display none. So let's do that actually. Let's add display none at the very end here, because this is usually what I use it for personally. So I'll refresh. And then if I click on here, it disappears because then it goes to the class that has display none. And then if I click it, it appears again. If I click it, disappears, appears. So this is how you can toggle between, maybe you have a drop, maybe a right-clicking, a drop menu or something, so that when you click somewhere, a menu appears and goes away. Now to give you something good again, to just one more tip is that because we are using display none, every time we come back to this, we are activating the display again. And every time you activate the display, you can get your whatever item it is to actually animate. So we can use some animation here. So let me quickly just show you some. If I say add keyframes like so, this is how you create animations and give you that animation a name. I'm just going to call it appear. Then I'll tell it what to do at 0%. And also what to do at 100%. So you can put the in-betweens if you want. You can put 50%, 75%, depending on what you want to do. So I'll put some styles in here and I'll put some more styles in here. You can still do it like this, add some styles like that, add some styles. So here I will tell it to say, I want the opacity to be 0. And I want the, what else do I want? I want the scale. So I'll use a transform. And then I'll use a scale Y like that. The scale will be 0. So let me copy all this, bring it into the 100%. So when everything is done, I want the opacity to be 1 and the scale to be 1, which is the normal scale. And that's it. So let's see how that, oh, sorry about that. Here I just created the animation, I didn't apply it. So I have to apply the animation to the class name where, which it will be on when it appears. So I'm just going to say animation. The name of the animation is appear. I want it to last half a second. And I want it to ease in and out like that. Okay. So if I now refresh, that's what you see. And every time I click and open it again, it does that. Now, if you don't want it to scale from the middle, you can change the translation origin, the transform origin to the top. So this top is 0%, this is 100%, this is 0%, this is 100%. So I think if we translate it from here, 0.50, that should do just fine. So I can say transform origin. So I want it to be 0. Wait, I want it to be 50% on the x-axis, and then 0% on the y-axis. So let's see what that does. There you go. So top to bottom. Or if you want it, I can put 0, 0, then it's the top left corner. Okay, so this is how you use a class list to add and remove classes to an object, and to check if an object has a specific class that you are looking for. Okay, so hopefully you've learned something new here, and I will see you in the next tutorial.